Why I do not like the 40. Why I despise the 40, loathe the 40. Why I don't like the 40. It may not be what you think. That is what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm blessed to be your host. Bio in the show notes, because you shouldn't just listen to anybody with a microphone. Not because I'm part of the GunTuber glitterati or anything like that, because I have millions of followers, because I have real-world first-hand experience. That's why I started the podcast, and that's hopefully what I'm bringing here today. Now, that said, this is not a commandment. It's not you shall not have a 40, right? It's not a thing. This is my opinion on why I don't like the 40. If you like the 40, we can still be friends. But I'm going to make a case for why I don't like the 40, and it's probably not what you think. Let's talk about why it may not be what you think. It's not because the 40 doesn't work. The 40 as a cartridge works fine. It's not because it's not effective ballistically. The cartridge is perfectly fine ballistically. It's not even because it's not better round per round than the 9mm. None of those reasons are it. Why, pray tell, then do I not like the 40? Well, one, because it was born out of bureaucracy. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but if you're not familiar with the Miami-Dade shootout, you probably should familiarize yourself with it. It was a major turning point in American firearms history. A lot of stuff came out of that, maybe for the good, maybe for the bad. It was two guys, and two bad guys and a bunch of F.B.I. agents. The one bad guy was killed almost instantly, or taken out of the fight almost instantly. One guy killed and wounded a ton of F.B.I. agents. One dude. I forget if he was a Marine Corps or Army veteran, but one guy took on a whole bunch of F.B.I. agents and took a long time to take him out with a bunch of agents. Out of all those shots, one shot in the fight was with a 9mm, and it went through his arm, went into his chest, and stopped like an inch shy of his heart. Now, look at like the number, I don't know it off the top of my head, but look at the number of rounds fired by the F.B.I. and how many times that man was hit. And the lesson they took away from that was not, we need to make more hits. The lesson they took away from that, apparently, well, maybe that was one of the lessons, but one of the main lessons was this 9mm round, which was an early prototype hollow point, like not a prototype, but an early generation of hollow point. The lesson they took from that is, if this round would have been better, this fight would have ended, because out of all the shots that missed, this one that hit, if it had went a couple inches deeper, would have stopped the fight. I'm going to ask you, look at that circumspectly and ask yourself, is that the lesson that should have been learned from that encounter? Be that as it may, that was a lesson they took away, and they started development on the 40 Smith & Wesson. They looked at a couple of cartridges. They looked at the 10mm, but they decided that 10mm was actually too powerful. They could download it, and they didn't need the extra case. And here's kind of where the bureaucracy comes in. 10mm generally shot out of a larger handgun, and they can manage to recoil pretty well because they're in a larger handgun. But when they dropped the size of that, when they reduced the load a little bit, they said, oh, now we can fit it in a 9mm size handgun. You can. That doesn't mean that you should. And this is one of the big reasons I don't like the 40. It's the power to weight ratio is all off. Nothing wrong with a 40 if you put it in a full size like 1911. But then you're like, why would I do that? I would just go up to the 10mm because the 10mm fits in it. Exactly. But if you put, let's just say you did, and there have been, 1911s, 2011s chambered M40, quite a few of them. If you put it in a full-size gun like that, it's not bad because it's a full-size, heavy-framed handgun. But when you start shrinking it and putting it in a 9mm size handgun that was not designed for that, it's it's much more unpleasant to shoot. It's much more of a gritting your teeth kind of experience to shoot it. And almost, I'm going to go on, well, nobody shoots it as good as they would shoot that gun in a 9mm. Nobody. I don't care who you are. You can argue with that if you want, but think about this. I don't care how good you control recoil. If you reduce it, you control it better. If you reduce it, you can shoot faster. If you reduce it, you're going to get back on target quicker. Period. Even if you have zero flinch, zero anticipation, none of that. Even if you have zero of that, you're still going to return to target faster and get multiple hits on target faster. So one of the main issues I have with the 40 is they put it in 9mm size handguns, which it shouldn't be. It should be in a full large frame handgun. And if you do that, then it's not bad. But they didn't. The big they, right? They shoved it in a 9mm size handgun, which it wasn't designed for, which led to some issues. But even if you design it ground up for a 40 like the Smith & Wesson M&P did, which is slightly better, I think, even then it's still, the power to weight ratio is off in a regular size handgun. So that's one of the main reasons I don't like it. Now, I said before, it's not that it's not better round per round than a 9mm. I think it probably is slightly, but there's no actual hard data that in real world encounters the 40 is any better than 9mm. On paper is one thing, but actual real world stuff, is it better ballistically round per round if you're talking 180 grains at about the same velocity over 124, 147 grains, slightly wider bullet? Yeah, I don't see how it couldn't be better if you were using exactly the same hollow point technology. I don't see how it wouldn't be a little bit better, but you're talking 1mm of difference. So it's not really enough in my shooting experience to justify using it at all. And I'll go back to my real world firsthand experience with this. When I was, I shot 9mm in the Marine Corps. I was issued a Beretta. And after the Marine Corps, I went to work for L.A.P.D. I was issued a Glock 22 and 40 cal. The abomination. The horrible, horrible combination of a horrible gun and a horrible caliber. I carried that for a while, and back then I was, I thought I was a good shooter because I was a cop, and I was a fairly decent shooter as far as LAPD goes, which is the longest police academy in the country. They're kind of more highly trained than most other police departments. And I thought, oh yeah, combat veteran, LAPD, I know how to shoot a handgun. And I was carrying a 40. And I went to my first practical shooting competition. I forget if it was IDPA or USPSA. This would have been, I don't know, mid-aughts, mid to late aughts. And I had been a competition shooter before that, but in more precision rifle. And I went there and I got spanked. I literally got disqualified my first shooting competition. I was like, oh, maybe I don't know everything about handgun shooting. Maybe I have a lot to learn. Maybe if I'm pretty decent for a cop, maybe cops aren't that good at handgun shooters. And I could have stomped my feet and grumbled and competition shooting's worthless. But I saw these guys and what they were doing, and they were levels above what cops were doing in shooting a handgun. And so I started down this road, and I thought, well, 40 really is a struggle. Let me go to 45, because I was, hardcore caliber warrior back then, 45, and I bought a couple of really nice 45s. And I shot those, and I did some time testing when I started getting an actual shot timer and shooting targets for speed. And it's been so long I don't remember the actual numbers, but I could get, it wasn't just one or two more in a bill drill, which is 6 shots as fast as you can, or how fast can you keep them in a circle. It wasn't a few more in 2 seconds. It was a lot more. It was exponentially more that I could get with a 9mm than a 40. And the 45, while good, and I think in some ways can be really good, it costs more. And I looked at that at the time. Even reloading, it cost me maybe twice as much to reload 45 as 9mm. And I looked at it from my skill level, and I thought, well, I can shoot about twice as much, and I can shoot much faster with a 9mm. It just doesn't make sense that I would shoot anything other than a 9mm. Just period. It's It's more affordable to shoot. It is effective. And this was back, I switched to 9 back when I was the only guy that I knew and there was probably somebody else, right? But as far as guys that I knew in police work, I was the only one that I can think of rocking a 9mm. Back then it was hardcore 40 or 45, which is one of the reasons I briefly went to the 45. But just my own testing and data, I mean, Bible verse I'm going to throw at you here is, you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your bag differing measures. Or you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and a just weight and a perfect and a just measure. Right? You have to look at things soberly and circumspectly. A lot of people, I think, get the romantic of like, this caliber's better, it's more powerful. But is it better when you're actually shooting it? Is it actually better for you if you look at the actual numbers, if you look at math? Or you just want it to be better, so you pretend that it's better. When I looked at it with real world data, it was not in fact better. In fact, 9mm was better, which is why I switched to it. And this was long before the FBI was ever talking about switching back to 9mm, but I did, and I did not regret it, and I continue on to carry a 9mm most of the time. But getting back to the 40, it just, I don't care how good you shoot it. I don't care if you have zero flinch, zero anticipation, any of that. You're still not going to shoot it as well as a 9mm. Is it maybe better ballistically? Maybe a little bit, but is that worth the extra recoil, the extra cost of the ammo? 40 is not cheap. It's not as cheap as 9mm, unless you find some crazy sale at one point. But overall, over the course of a year or several years, it's not as affordable. You're going to be putting more abuse on yourself, more abuse on the gun. For, in the real world data, very little ballistic difference. So why? And that's kind of the big thing. Like, it was the good idea, machine of bureaucracy. Won't this be great if we take this, slightly bigger caliber and shove it in this little tiny gun? What could go wrong? I mean, and we've seen kind of largely the industry, vomit out the 40 Smith & Wesson because mostly for the reasons I just said. If we look even Glock, I think they've recently discontinued, I could be wrong about this, but I think they've discontinued all their 40 models. If it's not good enough for Glock, what does that say about the caliber? I mean, come on. Those are some reasons why I don't like the 40. And again, it's not because it doesn't work. It's not because it's not effective. It's not because, it's any of those things. It's because it doesn't make sense logically when you compare it to other calibers. Like, just why? Again, if you put it in a full-size, large frame handgun, it can be okay, but at that point, why wouldn't you go 45 or 10mm? So it just, it's kind of in this in-between world that doesn't really make sense unless you try and make it fit using, preferences and not actual, in my opinion, data and math. So just some thoughts there on why I do not like the 40. Again, if you like the 40, we can still be friends. Tell me what you think about that, what you think about the 40. I know some people that are diehard 40 guys, and I still have to carry a 40 sometimes, depending on the contract. There are still some dinosaur contracts out there that I'm a private security contractor that require some people to carry 40s, and sometimes that's me, and I loathe it. I don't like it at all, but I do it. It's still effective. It can still get the job done. You're just, rolling a boulder uphill when you don't have to. So, just my thoughts on that. Love to hear your thoughts on it. I appreciate you guys. I'll do that verse again for the verse of the day to close it out. You shall do no injustice in judgment and measurements of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, and honest ephah, and an honest tin. And the one I talked about earlier, you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and just weight and a perfect and just measure. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.